knocked everything over.
Oh, be careful now. The only thing you want to be knocked over on today's episode is your heart, because it's leaping out of your chest.
Oh, swoon.
Swoon.
Welcome to Story Sirens, the podcast where we deep dive into our favorite myths, legends, and mysteries. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Yenny, and love is in the air. Tomorrow is Valentine's Day, and here on this podcast, we're not cynics when it comes to love.
Ooh, are you and Alex doing anything romantic for each other?
Nope.
But I thought...
Listen, just because I'm a fan of Valentine's Day doesn't mean I'm actively participating in the holiday. I'm more of the type of person that's like, let's go get discount chocolates on February 15th and also go to restaurants February 15th when no one wants to go because then their other partner is upset that they didn't take them on February 14th. Yeah, that's me. That's me. And Alex supports me.
Okay, well then that sounds like true love and very relatable. Because, Valentine's Day has become very busy and chaotic, right? Like flying around trying to get a reservation and the candies and all this sort of stuff. And I mean, the big guy is flying all over the place on February 14th. He's really busy.
Santa?
No, silly Cupid.
Oh, right. The cute little baby with angel wings and a bow and arrow, which, I mean, let's be honest, it's kind of dangerous for a kid to be doing that if you ask me, but,
Well, I mean, what if I told you that Cupid wasn't actually a child? What if I told you he's a full-grown man?
What? No, Sarah, don't ruin Cupid for me.
A full-grown man with wings.
Okay, forget the baby. Keep talking. Come on now.
And what if I told you he has a love story of his own?
Well, don't tease us, Sarah. Come on, give us the hot-winged High Lord Goss.
Wrong story, but I love the enthusiasm. Okay, well, first of all, Cupid is the Roman name for the Greek god Eros. For simplicity, we're going to stick with the Greek names. At one point, considered to be a primordial god, having sprung into existence alongside Gaia, Chaos, and Tartarus, Eros was later claimed to be the son of Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, romantic love, pleasure, sex, and war, and Ares, god of war and courage. Eros was the god of desire, attraction, erotic love, lust, sex, and affection.
I guess that we can assume the spicy AO3 and Wattpad writers are the children of Eros, maybe?
Oh, 100%. Depictions of Eros show him as a handsome young man with wings and carrying a bow and arrow. There are some Greek depictions of Eros representing him as a mischievous child in his mother's retinue, which is why the Roman Cupid was often depicted as childlike, and why today we think of Cupid as a little boy or even an infant. Fun fact for art nerds, Eros and Cupid were often the inspiration for cherubs in medieval and Renaissance art.
I guess I could see why the artists in medieval and Renaissance times decided to use Eros and Cupid as inspiration for cherubs, because the supposed biblically accurate ones are they're a lot.
Yeah, they're a little terrifying.
So, wait a minute, Sarah. Do all of us fantasy girlies liked winged men because of Cupid and Eros?
Most likely.
You know what? I'm not even mad. I'm not.
So like I said earlier, Eros is often depicted carrying a bow and arrow. In his mythology, whoever was struck with Eros's arrow would fall madly in love with either the first person they saw or the person the gods wanted them to focus on. His arrows could affect both mortal and immortal beings, and they were the cause of a great deal of chaos and strife, which we will soon see in our story.
How soon, Sarah? The suspense is already killing me.
Don't rush me. I'm sorry if I wanted to give everyone some context.
Oh, we love context on this. This podcast is strictly all context. That's all it is.
Right. We have to take things in context. All right. So the story we're going to cover today first appears in the Roman novel Metamorphosis or The Golden Ass, written by Apuleius.
I'm sorry. Golden Ass? I need to read this.
Yep, he does turn into a donkey in it. So, fun fact.
Oh, God.
This is the only surviving ancient Roman novel written in Latin that we still have in its entirety. So it is kind of a big deal.
Okay, it is.
It was written in the 2nd century AD, but we know the story of Cupid and Psyche, or Eros and Psyche, is older than the novel because Psyche retains her Grecian name while everybody else has their Roman names. Once again, though, we will be calling everybody by their Greek names for simplicity.
All right, the main story of today's episode starts now, Sarah. My golden ass is waiting.
Once upon a time, there was a king and queen who had 3 daughters. The oldest 2 daughters were rather plain-looking, but the 3rd daughter, the princess Psyche, was strikingly beautiful. As she grew up, people from across the land traveled to see her beauty. Many people thought she must be an immortal, for whoever heard of a mortal being so lovely to look upon? Many even claimed she was more beautiful than Aphrodite herself.
Ooh, that's not good.
No. This caught the goddess's attention. When she gazed down at Earth, she saw that her altars were barren. No one was bringing her offerings. No one was praying to her. No one was paying any attention to her at all. This filled the goddess with anger and jealousy. When she saw that it was a mere mortal who had pulled her faithful followers away from her, Aphrodite's rage knew no end. So, she instructed her son, Eros, to fly down to Earth and shoot Psyche with one of his arrows to ensure that she would fall in love with the ugliest, lowliest, most hideous man on the face of the earth.
Ah, there it is. Oh, Sarah, jealousy at its finest.
So Eros flew to the palace in the middle of the night and landed quietly inside Psyche's bedchamber. As he approached the sleeping princess, he felt a bit of pity for her. While he sympathized with his mother, Eros did think the punishment for a mere mortal whose beauty would fade with age was a bit over the top.
I agree.
But he was ready to carry out his mother's instruction and drew an arrow from his quiver. He approached Psyche and scratched her arm with the tip of the arrow. The pain woke Psyche from her deep sleep, and she started awake, looking all around her for what had awoken her. But she never saw Eros because he was invisible. But Psyche was not the only startled one. When she woke up so suddenly, Eros had backed away from her quickly, and in doing so, had cut himself with his own arrow. He looked once more at Psyche, and his heart began to pound in his chest. He was madly in love with her. Realizing what had happened, Eros flew from the room and tried to think of a way to protect her from Aphrodite.
Wait a second. Does this make them enemies to lovers?
I think so.
Oh my gosh, yes. Keep going.
The following days, Psyche noticed the attention she had once received from the people of her lands had changed. While they still awed over her beauty and flattered her endlessly, she began to notice that no one was approaching her or her father with offers of marriage. She watched as her 2 older sisters were married to fine young princes, but there was no prince for Psyche. Time passed, and the king and queen grew worried. They sought out an oracle of Apollo and asked them if they had done something to anger the gods and what was to become of their youngest child. The oracle in turn answered,
"Your daughter will not be the bride of any mortal. Her husband is waiting for her at the top of the great mountain, and he is a monster who cannot be refused by God or man."
Ooh, nice one, Yenny.
I know, I wanted to be like a little old lady.
The king and queen were horrified by this, and both of them fell into a deep despair. But Psyche asked them,
"Why do you weep for me? If this is the fate that the gods have chosen for me, let me go and meet it." Okay, girl, love that. Be confident.
Right. Psyche's a fun character. So a wedding procession was prepared, though any outsider who saw it would certainly think it was a funeral procession. There were tears and cries and anguish from the crowd, and only Psyche maintained a calm demeanor as the procession walked up the great mountain. At the top of the mountain, the crowd left her, and Psyche stood breathless and anxious in her wedding gown. Then, the gentle wind, Zephyr, approached her and told her that he had been tasked with taking her to her husband. He gathered her in his arms and flew her towards a distant land. Psyche was set down upon soft grass, and when she looked around, she saw a beautiful forest and a fountain that bubbled with crystal clear water. She began to explore the forest and soon found a palace in the middle of it. Voices began to whisper around Psyche, urging her to go into the palace. She entered and saw that the palace was exquisite, unlike anything she had ever seen before. There were golden pillars, carvings of forests and woodland animals on the walls, tapestries, fine rugs, everything that a princess could ever hope to find in her home, and more. The voices guided her throughout the palace, telling her that this was to be her home from this day forward, and that she could go wherever she pleased.
I don't know how I feel about these voices. Gives me a little bit of a haunted house situation. Yeah.
Same. But apparently Psyche's not bothered.
Apparently.
The voices showed her where her room was, showed her where she could bathe and comb her hair and apply fine perfumes, and then showed her where the dining hall was. When she sat down in the hall, a table magically appeared before her, laden with the finest wines and the most wonderful delicacies she had ever seen. As she ate, music floated through the room, though no musicians could be seen anywhere. Psyche began to think that perhaps this life would not be so terrible if this was what her monstrous husband's palace could do.
Shit, I'd feel the same.
When darkness came, the voices told her to go to the wedding chamber, the bedroom, and there she would meet her husband. Once in the room, Psyche found there were no lamps or candles in it, and the curtains had been drawn across all the windows and balconies, so not even the light of the moon or the stars could come in. Then her husband came to her. She could not see him, but he spoke to her sweetly and tenderly, and he held her gently in his arms. And Psyche was not afraid of him. In the early hours of the morning, before dawn began to wake the sky with light, Psyche's husband left the bedroom, and she could find him nowhere in the palace.
Ah, the power of turning off the lights is strong. But also, the fact that she was like, okay, whispering sweet nothings to me, that's enough. I mean, it makes me crack up because, Psyche does not care. She's just like, okay, that's fine.
She's like, oh, this is my life. Cool, great, let's go for it. So things continued like this for some time. Psyche would often hold on to her husband and beg him to stay with her until morning. She would ask him to stay until the sky lighted so she could see his face and know him. In response, her husband said,
"Wait, Sarah, use your hot guy voice."
"Okay. Why do you wish to behold me? Do you have any doubt of my love? Have you any wish ungratified? If you saw me, perhaps you would fear me, perhaps adore me. But all I ask of you is to love me. I would rather you would love me as an equal than adore me as a god."
Oh, making my heart gush.
Yeah, sure. After this, Psyche stopped asking for him to stay. For a while. Time passed and Psyche grew bored with the entertainments and pleasures of the palace. She missed her family and told her husband as much. Psyche's unhappiness distressed her husband, but he did not like the idea of strangers in the palace. Relatable.
Yeah.
Eventually, though, he grudgingly consented to allowing her sisters to come for a visit. Zephyr, the gentle wind, brought the two sisters to the hidden valley, just as he had brought Psyche. Psyche ran towards them with her arms wide, and the three embraced each other and laughed and cried, so happy to see one another again. The three women entered Psyche's palace, and the attendant voices showed the sisters to their rooms and to the baths so they could refresh themselves. Psyche showed her sisters the treasures of the palace, the gardens, the fountains, then sat with them at an extraordinary dinner. At this time, the sisters were horribly jealous of the wealth Psyche was surrounded by, as it was so much greater than the wealth their princely husbands had provided to them.
Your sister is literally trapped in a palace on top of a mountain, yet you're jealous of her and her wealth. I mean, I can't even. This is just...
Right. Like, perspective, ladies.
Yeah, come
perspective.
on now. At least you could see your husband.
Yes! So they asked Psyche about her husband, to which Psyche responded that he was a handsome young man who was often away hunting. At this point, the sisters couldn't help themselves. Their jealousy got the best of them. They said to their youngest sister,
"But don't you remember what the oracle of Apollo said to mother and father? That your husband would be a great monster. We have heard the people surrounding the valley say that the valley is ruled by a monstrous beast. What if he is merely keeping you happy and fed so that he in turn can devour you?"
Psyche dismissed her sister's absurd ideas, but the more they talked, the more Psyche began to worry.
You must be careful, dear little sister,
they said.
You should hide a lamp and a knife in your bedchamber. When your husband is sleeping beside you, light the lamp so you can see him. If he is a monster, you can kill him with the knife and save yourself. If he is simply a handsome young man, then forgive our suspicions, but at least you will be safe and he will be none the wiser.
Love it. Psyche told her sisters that they were being dramatic and to leave the matter alone. But as the days passed, Psyche could not help but think about what they had said. When her sisters had left and she began to feel lonely for them, she realized what a vulnerable state she was in. Her sisters' suspicions got the best of her, and so she hid a lamp and a knife in her bedroom and waited for her husband to come to her.
Uh-oh.
Late in the night, Psyche could hear the even breathing of her husband as he slept. Quietly, she lit the lamp and looked at her husband for the very first time. There was no monster there. Instead, there was the most beautiful man she had ever seen, with golden hair and sparkling wings, whose feathers looked as bright and shining as new spring flowers. Psyche was amazed, and as she leaned closer to have a better look at him, a drop of burning oil fell from the lamp and landed on her husband's shoulder. Eros's eyes flew open, and he gazed at Psyche in horror before launching himself from the bed and flying out the window. Psyche ran outside after him, but stumbled and fell. Eros heard her fall and halted his flight, turning his sad eyes to her. "Foolish Psyche, this is how you repay my love. After I disobeyed my immortal mother and made you my wife, do you see me as a monster? Do you plan to cut off my head? Go. Return to your sisters since you prefer their gossip to my love. I have no other punishment for you than to leave you forever. Love cannot dwell with suspicion." With that, he flew away from the valley, trying to ignore Psyche's cries for him.
You know what? I'm also not mad at this. While I don't think it's right for Eros to have left Psyche always wondering about what he looked like, I also think that Psyche should have known better than to listen to her sisters. She had everything she wanted, from wealth and comfort to late night sexy time. You know what I'm saying? Okay, you can't see his face, but you can hear him. And also, this kind of brings about the don't air your dirty laundry to people, because then they're going to give you advice. And sometimes that advice is not actually the best advice for you to,
Yeah, sometimes that advice is not always in your best interest.
Oh, absolutely. I also don't know why he lies to her and tells her he's a monster. He's obviously not. He's still himself.
Right. I don't know if this is in part because he's trying to make sure that, she loves me for me and not because I'm a beautiful god or anything like that. And, kind of like maybe all this time he's been testing me and he's actually a billionaire and he was just waiting to make sure my love was real.
That's a book.
That is a book. But I agree with you. I do like Eros's line of love cannot dwell with suspicion, because that is true. So, when her crying began to die down, Psyche looked around at where she had tripped and fallen. And to her horror, the palace was gone. The valley itself was gone. Everything was gone. Instead, she saw that she was in a different land, near where her sisters lived. Gathering herself up, she went to her sisters for comfort as she wept over her foolishness and what she had lost. But her sisters only pretended to grieve with her, and each of them thought to herself,
"Now that he is done with her, perhaps he will wish to marry me."
Early the next morning, both of them rose at separate times and climbed the great mountain that Psyche's wedding procession had traveled. At the top, they each called out for Zephyr to gather them up as he had when they had last visited the hidden valley, and then jumped. But Zephyr never heeded their calls, so both sisters fell to their deaths.
I mean, I'm not mad. I'm not mad.
Now Psyche was truly heartbroken, having lost her husband and sisters and realizing that her sisters had meant her harm. She began to wander the lands day and night, looking for her husband. One day she came upon a beautiful temple and wondered perhaps if it was a temple meant for his worship. Upon entering, she saw that there was corn and grain scattered everywhere, and tools for the harvest lying in unsightly heaps. There was no organization to the offerings, for that was obviously what they were, and this was not a temple to Eros, but Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. Psyche was bothered by the mess, knowing it was unfit for the goddess, and began to organize the offerings, laying everything in neat stacks and rows that would please the goddess. Demeter noticed Psyche's piety and approached the mortal girl.
Dear Psyche, you are worthy of my attention and pity, but I fear I do not know where your husband has fled, and I cannot shield you from Aphrodite's wrath. I can, however, help you navigate the wrath of the goddess. Go to Aphrodite directly and offer yourself to her with humility and submission. Meekly seek to win the goddess's forgiveness, and perhaps you will earn her favor. In turn, she may tell you where you can find your immortal husband.
So Psyche did as instructed. She traveled to the temple of Aphrodite, full of fear and resolve, and made an offering at Aphrodite's temple. The goddess of beauty and love whisked the girl away to her home and made her anger known.
Faithless, thankless girl, have you finally realized you owe your great beauty to me? It is I who have given you your gifts, and it is I you have forgotten. Or are you merely here to find your husband, my son? He is still recovering from the wounding his loving wife inflicted upon him, and you are unworthy of his presence.
When Psyche continued to bow before the goddess and express her guilt, her sorrow, and her humility, Aphrodite decided she could have fun punishing the poor mortal girl.
I have a series of tasks for you, dear Psyche. If you accomplish them to my satisfaction, I will consider telling my son you are here.
Aphrodite led Psyche to the granary, where there lay great disorganized piles of corn, wheat, barley, rice, and lentils, all mixed together.
Organize these piles into the crates here, like with like, before evening falls.
Aphrodite left the storeroom, and Psyche stood there, staring in silence and disbelief at the immense chore before her. There was no way she could do what Aphrodite asked. But Eros knew Psyche was there, and he knew his mother had given her an impossible task. So he spoke to the ants of the field and sent them to the granary to help Psyche with her task.
I feel like so many authors have used this particular scene of the story and made crazy versions of it so many times, because it's always the same thing, impossible task, and then the lover helps them, but then maybe they're enemies and then they become friends, or they're just friends and now they're lovers. This is like such a used scene,
right?
A lot.
Hey, it's popular. The fans seem to like it. Don't fix it if it ain't broke.
I guess.
The little ants dutifully marched past where Psyche still stood in silent shock and began to organize the piles of grains into the assigned crates. When twilight approached, Aphrodite returned from a feast with her fellow gods and went to laugh at Psyche's progress, or lack of progress. But what she saw instead was a neat and orderly granary, with all of the corn, wheat, barley, rice, and lentils perfectly organized. The goddess raged indignantly and knew her son had intervened somehow. She threw some food on the ground for the mortal girl, then locked her in the storeroom. The next morning, Aphrodite let Psyche out of the storeroom and presented her with her next task. She pointed towards a far tree line.
Beyond that grove is a herd of sheep. They have no shepherd, and their wool is made of fine gold. Go and collect a bit of wool from every single sheep and bring it back to me.
Psyche agreed to do as asked and headed towards the grove. Once there, she came to a river and saw that the golden sheep were grazing in the meadow just beyond the river. As she stepped into the water to cross, the god of that river began to speak to her.
Dear mortal, do not approach the sheep. They are wild and vicious, full of unnatural wrath and hunger. The rams will trample and eat you.
At this, Psyche cried out and told the river god that she had been instructed by the goddess Aphrodite to retrieve wool from each of the sheep.
Do not be distressed. You may still obey your orders. Wait until the sun is a bit lower.
when all of the sheep have grazed to satisfaction and go to nap in the meadow. Then you can gather the wool that clings to the bushes and trees they have all passed. Present that to the goddess, and you will be spared her wrath, as well as the violence of the rams."
So Psyche did as the river god instructed, waiting until the sheep were asleep at the far side of the meadow, then plucking tufts of golden wool from the bushes and trees. She thanked the river god many times, then returned to Aphrodite. Of course, Aphrodite was not happy about Psyche's success.
"I know you didn't accomplish this on your own, and I still doubt you are of any use. So here is another task for you,"
the goddess said. She handed Psyche a small box and told her to travel to the underworld and approach Persephone.
"Ask her to put some of her own beauty into the box, for my beauty has faded because I have been tending to my wounded son. Bring the box back to me by tonight so that I can paint my face before the feast of the gods."
Psyche took the box and knew that this time she would surely die. In fact, in order to reach the underworld, Psyche knew she had to die. So she found a great tower and climbed to the top, convinced that the fastest way to reach the underworld would be by throwing herself to her death.
Sorry, real quick, can we just talk about how she was willing to just give up her life for this love?
Yes!
Wow.
She's committed. She is committed.
Eros, come on now.
Yeah. But a voice called to her, telling her that there was a better way to reach the underworld, a way that would not end her life. The voice told her which road to travel, how to avoid the dangers of the underworld, how to placate the three-headed dog Cerberus, and what to say to Charon, the ferryman, to convince him to ferry her to and from the underworld. Finally, the voice said, "After Persephone has given you some of her beauty to take back to Aphrodite, whatever you do, do not open the box. Do not look in the box. Do not remove the lid. Do not let your curiosity destroy your reason."
Oh my God, that voice sounds familiar. I wonder who it is.
Really? And also, dear listener, we all know that there's a bad history with Grecian women and boxes. We just know. Psyche followed the directions of the voice and safely arrived in the underworld. Hades and Persephone welcomed her into their court and offered her a place at their feast table. But Psyche ate nothing from the table because she listened to story sirens and how you should never eat something from the Fey realm
There you
or
go.
the underworld. Psyche ate nothing from the table and told the queen of the underworld about her task. Persephone took the box and left the table. When she returned, the box had been resealed and she handed it back to Psyche. The mortal girl safely left the underworld and was relieved when she felt sunlight once more on her skin. As Psyche traveled back to Aphrodite's palace, her curiosity grew and grew.
Of course.
She wondered what the beauty of a goddess looked like inside the box. She knew that she herself was looking worse for wear and wanted to ensure that she looked presentable when she next saw her husband. So, Psyche carefully opened the box just a little bit, but there was no goddess-bestowed beauty in there. Instead, there was a sleeping curse.
Oh.
And rather than landing on Aphrodite as Persephone had intended, the curse caught hold of Psyche. The poor mortal girl fell to the earth, trapped in a death-like sleep.
You know, this girl just does not learn. Your
No.
curiosity is no good. No good.
At this time, Eros was healed of his burns and his broken heart, and wanted more than anything to be reunited with his beloved Psyche. But Aphrodite had locked every entrance and exit of her palace, trying her best to keep the lovers separated. Luckily, an attendant had opened Eros's window just a smidge to let the cool breeze in, and Eros was able to fly out of the window and seek out his wife.
Go get her.
He found her, unconscious, with the box opened at her side. Shaking his head at her, he gathered the curse off of her and poured it back into the box. When Psyche opened her eyes, she saw her husband smiling down at her. "Again, that horrible curiosity of yours has almost been your end. But go and take the box back to my mother. I will make sure all is well for us." Psyche's eyes filled with tears upon seeing him again, and she wanted to say more to him, but he told her to wait until their tasks were completed. So Psyche returned to Aphrodite, box of beauty in hand, and the disgruntled goddess took the box and disposed of it, knowing Persephone would never willingly give her any of her own beauty. Meanwhile, Eros presented himself before the great Zeus, asking him to help save his mortal bride from his immortal mother. Zeus had seen the tasks that Psyche had completed, and he saw that Eros loved his mortal bride. So, Hermes was sent to retrieve Psyche from Aphrodite's home, and when Psyche was brought before Zeus, he gave her the drink ambrosia.
Drink this, Psyche, and become an immortal like us. You and Eros have proven your love and loyalty. Never will he break from you. Never will you abandon him. Your marriage shall last.
And so Psyche became a goddess, the goddess of the soul to be exact, and was reunited with her husband. Aphrodite could no longer harm Psyche, and Eros trusted her loyalty. A great wedding feast was held by the gods to celebrate the lovers, and they lived happily ever after.
I'm super upset that we weren't invited to
I know,
that
right?
feast. What do they think? You know? we're here talking about their love story and they didn't invite us.
I know. Like we're trying to bring some attention and there we've been snubbed.
Left out.
So, in some variations of the myth, there is an additional task where Psyche must fill crystal vases with water of the cocytus and the Styx, a task dangerous for mortals. In that task, an eagle assists her. There are also versions where Psyche discovers she's expecting Eros' child shortly after they're separated, raising the stakes further. Their daughter was called Hedone, or pleasure, and was said to be one of Aphrodite's favorite grandchildren.
I'm sorry. They named their daughter Pleasure? Well, I mean, shit, I guess I could name my son Annoyance. There
we go.
Yeah. What would you name your son?
Patience wearing thin.
Shit, that's gonna be my son.
Trouble. Mischief. A menace to society. Oh, wait, no, that's my dog. That's what I say. That's what I say to our dogs and our cat all the time. You're a menace to society, and I am society. All right, now, there is some debate amongst scholars, philosophers, and readers in general about whether the story is as beautiful of a love story as many of us often interpret it to be. Some scholars argue that Psyche is stripped of her autonomy throughout the story, while others claim that her curiosity is spoken of as a moral failing and a character flaw. Now, I personally view that Psyche maintains her autonomy throughout the story, making choices for herself and, as she says to her parents, meeting her fate with her head held high. She doesn't have to look for Eros after he's left. She doesn't have to accept Aphrodite's challenges. She doesn't have to tend to the temple of Demeter, but she chooses to. Psyche is a woman of perseverance and courage, who is curious both to a fault and to her benefit. And Eros loves that about her.
No, I love that, Sarah. I completely agree with you.
Yay, I'm glad. But listeners, what do you think about the story? We'd love to hear your thoughts in our Discord channel.
Let's move on into some modern media. C.S. Lewis and his wife Joy Davidman wrote the novel Till We Have Faces, which is a retelling of the Cupid and Psyche legend. It is told from the perspective of Psyche's sister, called Urel in this novel, as she struggles to trust the gods and understand how their involvement in mortal lives could produce anything other than harm.
You what?
Oh, ham instead of... Wait, they can't produce anything but ham.
Ham? Why is everything ham? Oh my gosh. Okay, that's great.
They can't produce anything but harm other than harm, guys. Although ham would have been a great story too.
Golly, that would definitely raise some questions.
That made me cry.
Okay. I pretty much love all artwork depicting Eros/Cupid and Psyche, but one of my favorites and one of the most popular is the statue Psyche Revived by Cupid's Kiss by Italian master Antonio Canova. The statue has lived in Paris at the Louvre since 1824.
Ooh.
The book Love in Color by Bolu Babalola is a collection of retellings of myths and love stories from around the world. Of course, there is a Cupid and Psyche retelling in there.
Did you know Beauty and the Beast is loosely based on Eros and Psyche? We're not talking about the Disney version. Nay, but the 1740s original tale written by Gabrielle Suzanne Barbeau de Villeneuve. Still, the Disney version can be seen to loosely interpret today's tale, especially that part of, the house talking to her and giving her the feast. And, the whole point of the story is that Belle falls in love with who the Beast is instead of what he looks like.
Aww.
Sarah, you should be proud of me because I had a lot of jokes lined up regarding Psyche and her monstrous husband, if you get what I mean. But I behaved.
I am surprised, proud, but also kind of wondering what those jokes might have been.
The world may never know, but I'm sure our listeners can guess. As for your siren call, watch Beauty and the Beast or read the original tale. Fair warning, the OG stories are never as cute or PG as the Disney ones. Have a great day, guys.
Bye!
Thanks for listening to Story Sirens. You can follow us on Instagram at Story Sirens Podcast. Want to support us? Send us a cup of Ko-fi by searching ko-fi.com/storysirens. We've got lots of treats for those who become siren seekers. All research materials can be found in the episode summary. Music by Donald Guzzi and artwork by Alexis Torres. Story Sirens is a Feather and Fin production. See you soon.